It's not optional to understand this, it's absolutely crucial to comprehend it. The first thing you'd want to note about postmodernism is that it doesn't have an ounce of gratitude, and there's something pathologically wrong with a person who has no gratitude. Especially when living in what so far is the best of all possible worlds. So if you're not grateful, you're driven by resentment, and resentment is almost the worst emotion you can experience apart from arrogance. Resentment and deception. There you have a malignant triad, and if you're bitter about everything that happens around you despite being immersed in wealth, then there's something absolutely wrong with you. So, you must educate yourself about postmodernism. So here's what the postmodernists believe. They don't believe in the individual. That's the logos part. Western culture is logos. It's the logic, which is partially the Christian word, but also partially the root of the word logic. They don't believe in logic. They believe that logic is part of the process by which the patriarchal institutions of the West continue to dominate and justify their dominance. They don't believe in dialogue. The root of the word dialogue is logos again. They don't believe that people of goodwill can come to a consensus through the exchange of ideas. They believe that notion is part of the philosophical and practical substructure of the dominant culture. So the reason they don't allow people who disagree with their ideas to speak is that they don't agree with allowing people to open their mouths. What else do they believe? They believe that since you don't have an individual identity, your fundamental identity is group-based. And that means you're basically an exemplar of your race. Hence white privilege. Or you're an exemplar of how you can be classified to place you in the position of victim against oppressor because that's the game. It's a post-Marxist trick on the old Marxist notion of the struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And that failed to have any philosophical or ethical stance because people saw their lifestyles improved by Western democratic corporations. And the postmodernists basically did a sleight of hand and said, if it's not poor against rich, it's oppressed against oppressor. Simply redistributing subpopulations in ways that make our philosophy continue to advance. So for the postmodernists, the world is a battlefield of identities and they don't communicate with each other because they can't. All there is a power struggle. And if you're in the predator group, that is, if you're an oppressor, you'd better watch out because you're not exactly welcome. Your ideas aren't welcome either. That's what you're up against. I'd say it's time for conservatives to stop apologizing for being conservative. You don't apologize to these people. That's a big mistake. They read an apology as an admission of guilt. You don't apologize if you don't back down. The young people who are there, university students, need to take control of the student unions because they're authentic vipers' nests, and they have been since the 1990s as far as universities go. I thought at one point that it would be best to reduce their funding by 25% and let them fight among themselves for the scraps because that would force them to decide exactly what's important and what isn't. So I'd say the humanities and much of the social sciences have become a postmodern neo-Marxist playground for radicals. The research is terrible. 80% of humanities papers are cited once, which means they write papers for themselves and sell them to libraries, and that's how publishers make money. No one reads them, but publishers can print them because libraries have to buy them, and they're buying them with your tax money. So all of you sitting here are funding a radical neo-Marxist postmodern agenda rooted in the university, and your tax money goes to that. And if you want proof of that, just go online and look at websites, especially in disciplines like women's studies, which are pathological to the core. But it's not just women's studies, it's all ethnic studies groups. Anthropology, sociology, social work, and above all, education. Our society needs to figure out how to stop allocating public money to radical left-wing activists. If we were doing that for extreme right-wing activists, there would be an absolute storm. But it's happened incrementally since the 1960s and it needs to stop. That's partly what conservatives, and not just conservatives but also true liberals, are fighting against. What's happened as a consequence of this postmodern neo-Marxist intellectual invasion is that the center keeps moving. Now it's shifted to the right. So if you're a classical liberal, you've become a conservative. And for all of you who are interested in furthering the conservative agenda, there are plenty of classical liberals you could be talking to. And finally, in terms of talking to young people, they have something to sell them. It's not easy to sell conservatism to young people because they want to change things, and that's not what conservatives want to do. Conservatives want to keep things. Well, now they have something to sell them. They can sell them freedom of speech and responsibility. The left is selling them rights. You can sell them responsibility, and I can tell you why. I've received many letters of the sort that God was talking about earlier. Young people are absolutely starving for someone to provide them with a sense of responsibility. Look, here's something worth living for, man. You can find meaning in life with freedom, but freedom is a kind of chaotic meaning, and freedom isn't the kind of thing that makes people happy. It's the kind of thing that makes people problematic because freedom expands your range of options. And that makes you nervous and uncertain. But responsibility is something else. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's a good thing. But it requires you to take responsibility for the freedom. But responsibility itself is what gives your life genuine meaning in the face of suffering, and young people are really hungry for that. I've been teaching young people for 30 years, and mostly what I've taught them is about responsibility. And one of the responsibilities of young people is to figure out what's at the core, the supreme importance of the individual and the divinity of speech, man. That's something that can be sold. It's what our whole culture is based on. In this video, Jordan Peterson highlights the importance of countering postmodernism and its destructive notions. He warns against the dangerous triad of resentment, arrogance, and deception that pervades this philosophy. Peterson advocates for resistance against the postmodern invasion in educational institutions and the need for true conservatives and liberals to defend their values. His call to sell responsibility to the youth as a source of meaning versus freedom resonates deeply. In my opinion, Peterson's reflection offers valuable guidance for navigating current ideological complexities.